I feel we're making work for ourselves, Graham and I, by raising this issue. But it must be raised. Put simply, and get ready for it, we're going to talk about flying foxes, bats. I'm not the only one mystified as to why, when push turns to shove, the odds seem to favour the flying fox. These things are everywhere. Wherever we are broadcasting tonight, there'll be a colony of flying foxes. I remember way back in 2013 talking about 3 people who'd contracted the virus that these mongrel things spread. Lyssa virus, all in Queensland. All 3 died. It is beyond the understanding of sensible people why we are not culling bats. In New South Wales, they just announced a policy where you can cull deer, but bats are untouchable. Some years ago, the situation was so bad in the Royal Botanic Gardens of Sydney that management had to play loud industrial noise and banging sounds to scare off a colony of 5,000 of these things, flying foxes. They had destroyed 28 trees, 30 palms and damaged a further 300 trees. But listen to this. When they scared them off, it was said that they hoped the flying foxes would join existing permanent colonies, at Parramatta, Centennial Park, Gordon, Walleye Creek, Clyde, Cabramatta, Avalon, Macquarie Fields, Kareela Park. Oh, hang on. There are other colonies at Oakley, Warriewood, Fairlight, Gladesville, Kurnell, and that's only Sydney. I've had calls from all over Australia. Back in 2013, the director of the Royal Botanic Gardens said it took him 2 years to get federal government approval to scare these things off and 5 years of planning to halt the damage being done to the gardens. At one stage, there were 22,000 flying foxes or bats. They are vermin, they're a pest, and they're dangerous. But farmers and landholders are prohibited from touching them. Flying foxes excrete a virus, a deadly Hendra virus, more often than usual in stressful situations. While people can't contract the virus directly from the bats, they can through horses which pick up the Hendra virus, and you wouldn't know this was going on, by eating feed or water contaminated with flying fox body fluids and excretions. And this Lyssa virus is another risk. It's an infection borne by bats, and it infects human beings from a bite or a scratch. It kills people. But the powers that be seem more prepared to protect bats, and there are millions of them, than people or animals. And these things exist from one end of the country to the other. I could be here all night telling stories. Some years ago, a woman stepped outside onto the balcony of her Brisbane flat to shake a towel. She wasn't aware that flying foxes were nesting in palm trees abutting her balcony. One somehow became entangled in the towel. It scratched her left foot and drew blood and bat excreta from 2 other bats, which were disturbed, and that stuff was splattered on her face. She had to undertake a course of 9 successive immunoglobulin injections into the right cheek of her face in a bid to prevent her catching Lyssa virus, which is a kind of rabies carried by bats. She had to endure another series of injections into her arm before she was given the all clear. There's no treatment for bat Lyssa virus, which results in paralysis, delirium, convulsions and death. But in the battle between flying foxes and human beings, the flying foxes win. Now, we've never done this before on this program, but re-enter tonight's first guest, Craig Kelly again, the member for Hughes, down round Kurnell. When Bob Carr was Premier, they built a desalination plant at Kurnell. During the planning, Craig Kelly warned that damage from construction would upset a large colony of flying foxes in a remote location on the Kurnell Peninsula. The Labor government ignored the advice. Craig Kelly was right. The colony of flying foxes, feral bats, abandoned their home at Kurnell and relocated to a gully in Bates Drive, Kareela, where approximately 10,000 bats had a camp. They congregate during the day next to Bats Drive Special School and the Sylvandale Foundation, an organisation that provides support to young people with intellectual disabilities. As Craig Kelly says, try explaining to an intellectually disabled child, and he had one at this school, that the bats should not be handled, or that bat faeces that cover the playground should not be handled without caution and close attention to hygiene. Craig Kelly is back with us because he's experienced all of this firsthand and, like all of us, has conspicuously failed. I know your boy's no longer at that school, but just explain to our viewers what you know about your experience.
Well, my little son has born with Down syndrome and has autism. He doesn't have any language. And for 12 years he went to Bates Drive Special School down in Corilla. Absolutely wonderful school. The teachers are just saints. But next to there, all of a sudden we had these bats that came in from Cornell and took over the gully. And I went down there and you can't describe it. Words could not describe what you saw. It was 20,000 of these bats in the trees squawking away. They killed all the trees off and they were only a few yards flying over the kids' playground. Now, the problem with, it's a problem with all kids, but especially with disabled kids, because disabled kids can't talk. Yes. So if you get scratched by one of these bats, as you just described there, you need to go through these very painful course of injections because it's a rabies-like virus. And there was a young 8-year-old boy that was died up in Queensland. He was scratched. He was one of those tough little kids that never complained to his parents, and it was too late when they found out to give him the drugs, and he died. Little 8-year-old boy died because of this, from this Listeria virus. Now, we were terrified at that school that one of the kids would be scratched in the playground. He wouldn't be able to say what happened to him. We fought and we argued, and it was every time there was something ready to be done, we were ready to go and try to put a fire through the gully, to burn it, to clear it all out. Every time we tried to do something, we were thwarted by some environmentalist group at every single stage. And now we've got the same problem down at Camellia Gardens, down there in the Sutherland Shire. And it's spreading everywhere.
Oh, it's everywhere. I mean, I understand that the staff at Bates Drive were forced to close the windows in the classrooms and offices, even on the hottest of days. And here they are looking after disabled kids. Now, this is a close relative of rabies, this thing. It's got a long incubation period, causes swelling and swelling of the brain.
It's a most painful death.
Look at they are here. Look at these bloody things. Look at them. They're everywhere. Everywhere.
And it's the most painful death. That little 8-year-old boy that died, they said he went through a terrible death that he did. And this is the concern that everyone has that has these things next to them. And yet, for some reason, the environmental lobbyists are so strong that it doesn't appear that you can do anything about it.
But look at them here. Look at them here. I mean, they're unbelievable. And these things are flying vermin. I just want to come back to the school that your little boy was at. Intellectually disabled at Bates Drive. Can't speak. Can't tell anyone if they've been scratched or bitten by a bat. You warned that if you start building a desalination plant, these things will migrate. They migrated right outside your school. And the 8-year-old who was scratched, and you mentioned died, didn't tell anyone. He couldn't till it was too late. I had a woman from Toombul ring me yesterday, I think, and she said that you can't put a washing on the line. They defecate on the washing, and they make all this noise. She wakes to this noise all the time. No one will listen to her. I can't sleep at night. They scream and carry on, and they crap everywhere, and it is a risk to human health. I mean, why is the well-being of the flying fox more important than the well-being of human beings?
Because we have a small group of noisy so-called environmentalists that put human health behind that of these bats. We see this across many aspects of our society. The small group of rabid environmentalists simply would rather be concerned about the bats than rather about disabled kids. And that's what the bottom line this gets down to.
We saw these pictures. They're in plague proportions.
Alan, I've seen them out at my lecture in Chipping Norton coming across in the evening, and the sky is black. You cannot count them. They're in the not in the thousands, they're in the tens of thousands.
Yep.
Now the thing is, and they migrate, they can move.
Yeah, move. They're everywhere.
Yeah, and you
wherever
can't,
people are watching us tonight.
It's illegal to try and scare them away.
Well, under the New South Wales, this is just New South Wales, now Queensland have similar act, Threatened Species Conservation Act, and the Commonwealth have a Commonwealth Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act of 1999. It is illegal to do anything, Graham, to even disturb them.
This is a threatened flying rat, and it threatens
Look at the trees there.
As far as I'm concerned, whatever you do to them is okay by me. I think that these things can be a horrible, horrible thing to live next to. I've been to see people who've suffered from this, and I know how bad it can be. And I feel for you on this score, Craig, because this is
But they defecate.
Thing.
They defecate.
Never stop.
That never, ever stop, and you've got 10,000s of them.
And it's not as though someone moves next to these areas and they know the bats are there, like you say would an airport. You move next door to an airport, you know the airport's there. People have been living in suburbs like for decades, and all of a sudden these bats migrate and move in next to them, and people can't do anything about them. We've got to have a clear look at the laws on this. Now, look, if the bats are in the national park or in their remote rural areas, fair enough. But when they're close to where people live, when they're close to their schools, we've got to be able to have quicker and stronger laws that you can get in and do what's needed. Even if it means coming in and taking to these things with a flamethrower to get in and try and get them out of where people live.
But hasn't the legislation got to be altered? I mean, here we are introducing legislation to New South Wales where there is a licence now to shoot deer because they are a danger to people and the environment. That's the argument. How could a deer be more dangerous than these damn things?
Well, Alan, we know there are deaths on record from these things. How many more kids are going to have to die, or people die, from this Larissa virus until we wake up and we change the prohibitions, take these things off the endangered... Like, how can these things on endangered species list? They're in plague proportions, not only across the nation.
And it's also animals, Graham, because recently there was a hell of a scare. Like, the Hunter Valley is the home of some of the greatest thoroughbred stock in the world. One horse started to wobble and people had no idea, got the vets out. Hendra virus. Suddenly you've got to put a rope around, you've got to quarantine the whole joint. Every animal has got to be injected. Every horse is at risk because it can be transferred from them then to human beings. You don't know what the horse has eaten, you don't know what the stuff's on the ground, and you can't get... You've failed, I've failed, I've written God knows how many letters. No one listens, which is the reason we're talking about it tonight. But, I mean, where do we go from here? So you can talk till you're blue in the face. The bats will still be there tomorrow, next week, next year.
You're not allowed to kill anything, even something that needs to be killed or it'll kill you. You're still not allowed to kill them.
Graham, no, forget about killing them. You can't disturb them. So if some kid got a rock and hoisted it at the tree, the kid's in strife.
John? That's the current law as it stands at the moment. You can't disturb them. Now, we've got to start standing up for the silent majority of this country and not listening to these few noisy green activists, because there's too many of us in politics, both state, federal levels, Labor and Liberal, doesn't matter what you are, that are too frightened to do things because we've got these noisy green advocates that are going to come after them. You've experienced it, Alan. You know what it's like. But you've got to have the courage to stand up, and especially when it comes to these bats, and say we are going to put the safety and security of kids and communities first before these bats.
Well, now, look, wherever you're viewing us here, we would be interested. We don't tell you this often enough, but you can send your experience to us, and we'll read all of those to your say at skynews.com.au. One word, your say, at skynews.com.au, because this is a problem right across Australia, wherever you're viewing us, or you can actually send it to me, Alan Jones at 2GB.com. And I suppose the only way we've got any kind of redress here is that we marshal and mobilise, which I'm happy to do that, marshal and mobilise all these complaints, because something has to happen. There are people everywhere who are feeling the impact of this, and it is a threat to human well-being, human health and human life. So your say, one word, at skynews.com.au or Alan Jones at 2GB.com. Good to talk to you, Greg. How's your little boy now?
Oh, he's good. He's out of school. He's a happy little kid. And I must say, I can't thank the teachers at that Bates Drive school enough. They are saints that look after our disabled kids.
But they copped it.
They did.
And, of course, that colony is still there. I mean, it's dispersed a bit. It's still there.
We've had to fight very hard to even get just a little bit of relief from them.
It's ridiculous.
It is just a tragedy, isn't it?
Sometimes... I mean, I've been an advocate for a whole lot of green causes, as we all know. But one thing I've always known, people come first.
You've hugged a few trees in your day.
I've hugged a million of them.
To win a vote or two. I remember seeing
They don't hug you back. That's the problem.
At the Atherton table, up you went, hugging the trees. That was Richo, the Minister for the Environment. OK, thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Alan.